everyone, and welcome to the Presumption with me and my favorite guys, Jim Griffin and Matt Fondelier. And today, I think our guest needs no introduction. You know her from everything from mainstream media to social media to reality TV to her new podcast, Unlocked. Welcome, Savannah Chrisley.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And by the way, we also really like guests who have that Southern accent to kind of balance out with Jim. So that's another tip. So look, I'm going to be honest with you. Well, before I get back to you, we're covering a lot of ground today. Starting with your parents' case, we're going to let you make your case about what you believe was an injustice. Prison conditions that your father is facing, First Amendment rights related to that, and then some things that I've heard about potential avenues of justice for your parents. But, one other thing I'm going to be honest with you is we're lawyers. We're white collar lawyers, like kind of lawyers that helped your parents. And this is the Presumption podcast. So you've been very vocal about your parents were deprived of the presumption of innocence and that they were wrongfully convicted, and you maintained their innocence, and that they got overpunished with all of it, right? And so, but one of the things that we're not is we're not reality TV followers. And I have to be honest with you, just want to get it out of the way. When I first heard about your parents' case back in whenever they got indicted, 2019 or so. I was like, who are these people? And reality TV. Like I probably have never watched an episode of the Kardashians. And
hey, that's fine.
Yeah. And I thought, oh, God, like, why do I need to know about these rich people and what they do? And then this girl's really pretty, but it's just like a rich brat, and whatever, and you have turned it around for me. You have, because of the work that you are doing. And it's not just for your parents, but it goes beyond that. And so, on the shallow side, I did watch the one California episode because I really wanted to know. The prosecutors were alleging, and Jim and I have seen this in so many cases. Oh, they bought this kind of car. They got this kind of haircut, and the prosecutors were saying that your parents were flying to LA where I live, and they were getting really expensive haircuts from a celebrity hairstylist. And of course, I have been to all the hair salons. So I was like, what hairstylist is that? So out of curiosity, I watched that episode. But, we're not about reality TV, and that's really not why we're having this conversation. We're having this conversation about something that's really far more important. Our clients say the same thing. Our clients also say, I should have never been convicted, or my father should have never been convicted. So I really want you to make your case. So going back to the period that the government alleged the crimes occurred, this was 2007, 8, or 8, 9?
So 2008.
2008. And during that time, your parents were running what kind of business?
An asset management company. So it was one of the largest asset management companies in the country, had government contracts with Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac. And then when Obama came into office, that business went downhill. And that's when all these things started to occur.
But there's something about a Loanout Company or something. What is that for people that don't know?
Yeah, so a Loanout Company, it's people in the entertainment industry are very aware of it because in order for production companies to pay you, they need to pay a Loanout Company. And the Loanout Company that's who the contract was with, was Seven Seas Production. And then it's paid to the Loanout Company, then the Loanout Company will pay the individuals. And so
so you guys all got paid by the Loanout Company?
Yes.
Okay, and you reported that as your income. Okay. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Jim to get us started on some of the background that pertains to.
Yeah. I just want to. Before we get to your parents' case, you grew up in reality TV, I guess. What was that all about? And growing up in front of a camera, and what was it like?
Well, obviously I was born in South Carolina. My parents are from right outside of Anderson and Seneca, Westminster. You may know the area.
Oh, yeah. So Savannah, I was born and raised in Anderson. Pendleton's where I grew up, and I had a lot of friends Seneca and Walhalla and Oconee.
Yep.
That is a beautiful part of the world.
My dad worked at one of the plants right there very early on, like in his 20s. And I was born right there at Oconee Memorial Hospital. And so my parents grew up very, very white collar. My dad barely finished high school, got his GED. But with how we started TV and I was 15 years old, and life really took off then. For me personally, I attempted to go to college, but when you're 18 years old and you can afford to pay for your own college education, that's $50,000-$60,000 a year at a private college, it's kind of hard to be motivated. If I'm already at the point to be able to pay for the education, it was hard to stay motivated. Also, filming about 48 weeks out of the year was a lot. And it was a full-time job. And I got to work with my family day in, day out, which now is a blessing because I don't have them all here. And financially, it paved a way to have a great life, but it also puts a lot of targets on your back.
And then,
Yes.
living in the spotlight and then your parents get charged. I mean, that obviously had a huge impact on your whole family. Can you tell us what that was like?
Yeah, I mean, when the indictment happened, and first off, the case, there was state case, federal case, and there was a specialist who came in who evaluated the loss amount at around $65 million. And it was rough. Whenever you get a piece of paper that says, one of our lead lawyers called the day of the indictment, said, just wanted to let you know you've formally been indicted. I'll need $1 million in my account by the close of business today if you want me to represent you. And at that point, it all started, and $7 million later, they're sitting in federal prison.
Jesus.
Wow. So that was the cost of the defense, $7 million?
Mm-hmm. I would say 5.5, 6. Now we're close to that.
But that was attorney's fees and experts and all of that, right?
Yeah. But the attorney's fees took up a big portion of that, especially in such a case like this. There was 5 attorneys on the case, and then you had your investigators, and it never stopped.
Well, and with just for our audience, when you have tax charges that, a lot of times I have a lot of cases that are not tax fraud cases, but sort of other conduct puts the spotlight on tax issues. And once the tax stuff comes in, it gets way more expensive because you need a forensic accountant, which sometimes costs more than the lawyer. And I use an expert who's a former IRS guy, and then that's another.
That's who we used. Our guy was a former IRS guy. So
maybe your guy is my guy. I don't know. We'll talk on the record. Look, you recently sat down with your parents' current lawyer, Alex Little, who's very passionate. Obviously, this is a rather biased interview because it's like your parents and their lawyer, but it was great. I listened to it on Unlocked, your podcast. And Matt's going to play a little clip of, my favorite part. I don't know if Jim's seen it or not, but it's very on point.
We had this idea in America of, presumption of innocence. That's what we say on paper. It does not exist. I mean, the moment that somebody is charged with a crime, everybody just check out Instagram or Facebook they're guilty.
Presumption of innocence. So in 2019, they are charged both in a multiple count indictment, and then later comes a superseding indictment. Everything from conspiracy to commit bank fraud, tax evasion, filing fraudulent tax returns, and obstruction of justice. Then in 2022, they go to trial and were found guilty. You say they're targeted for their celebrity, and they didn't do this crime. There was no crime. There were no documents to support some of the charges. And so they definitely shouldn't do the time. And now that they're doing the time, it's this whole other issue that comes in, which is the conditions. So the conduct that the government alleges, you said goes back to 2007 and 8, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. according to the indictment, and it involves a Loanout Company, which you discussed with us. We have a lot of questions, right? So I'm going to turn it over to Jim. I asked Jim to take a deep dive into the pre-sentence report for your parents that the probation prepared. So we have some questions about sort of what the recommendations were for your parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So Savannah, you mentioned loss amount, and I'm sure you were educated in the sentencing guidelines, and loss amount is a big driver. And as I looked at the pre-sentence report, and thanks for sharing that with us, but the probation office set the loss amount at over $65 million, almost 65 to 100 million. And by the time they added all the enhancements, I mean, your dad's guideline range was life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and life means life. I didn't look at your mother's, but I'm sure it was very, very high up there. Your dad got enhancements for, being organizer, leader, et cetera. But then the government comes in and says, okay, well, we'll go with their objections. And so we want to be conservative. And, so your dad's looking at 20 years, and he ultimately gets, I think,
12
years. Yeah. And that was recently reduced. So, I mean, what was that like going through? And you're looking at your dad and thinking he's going to prison for the rest of his life. I mean, that's a scary proposition for sure.
Yeah, it's scary because you're also at a place to where you're looking at it and you see cases to where lives are taken or there's abuse that has occurred and they don't even get this time. And unfortunately, we have a government to where money means more than life. And I saw prosecutors who said, they were asking for life in prison. And also when it comes to the loss amount, the loss, just to clarify, the loss I was speaking about at the very beginning of the interview, the 65 million was just our career loss damages when someone came in and evaluated what we lost career wise. Now with the government was stating there was a $36 million loss. And then they dropped it down to 17 million is what they say the loss amount is. Our argument from the very beginning was show us the loan documents. Show us the loan documents so you can show us where you got this loss amount because it's not correct. And
well, wait a minute though. The loan documents that you're talking about, I understand pertain to the bank fraud charges.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Sarah,
the tax loss was $700,000, and that
tax loss is bogus. There was no tax loss,
and he paid those taxes. I mean, that's what that jumped out at me, Savannah. I mean, for a while we've heard Hunter Biden paid his taxes, so why is he being prosecuted? And I'm sure you feel strongly about that. I mean, that's.
Oh, I do, because our case was in Fulton County, Georgia, the most Democratic county in the state, and the prosecutor stated, ladies and gentlemen, what we have here are the Trumps of the South. And my argument to that is I've written a letter to congressmen, I've spoken to a ton of people, and I've said, if your argument in your case is that strong, why did you feel the need to invoke the name of Donald Trump in order to incite anger? That was the only reason that name was used. And I feel.
Were you the Trumps of the South?
Hey, you know what? According to prosecutors, I guess we were. But and people's opinions and beliefs are different. I mean, when it comes to for me and my family, obviously the federal government knows who you vote for well before they take you to trial. And it just, for me, it's the whole tax thing was complete. The state of Georgia just paid us $1 million. So how is one, like Alex says, how is one arm of the government going to fight to imprison you while another arm of the government is paying you $1 million?
Oh, we're going to get to that, the revenue department, all that down this interview. But okay, so part of your argument is also politics and political disposition of the judge and all that, which I want to ask you about. But you have been very clear about your mom getting sucked into this vortex of criminal accusations simply because she was married to Todd, and that they really had nothing on your mom. So tell me, number one, what was the evidence against your mom? Who were the government's witnesses, just in general, against both of them at the trial? And then third part, I know it's a compound question, why your parents didn't testify. Our listeners always want to know.
So when it comes to my mother, there was not 1 ounce of evidence. There just wasn't. When it came to, obviously, everyone's going to have their opinions on the tax fraud. The government, they started off a 4-week trial with the tax fraud case in order to create this image of these entitled, rich, selfish people who don't pay the government and they're above the law. And because they're not paying their taxes, guess who has to suffer? You, the jurors. You're working and paying, but these rich people aren't. So they created this whole narrative around the tax case in order to assassinate their character to then build their bank fraud case. And for the loan documents, my mom's 7 counts of bank fraud, but the government's own witnesses who they brought in, who were these bankers, who were vice presidents of these banks. Our lawyers asked, have you ever met Miss Chrisley? The only time we ever met her was when we came to their house for a Christmas party. She never gave us a document. They had never met her in a banking setting. And her name wasn't on a single bank loan. She never signed a document. There was not a single loan that was in her name. And so my theory on that is, as you all know, our Department of Justice, or Injustice, as I like to call it, they love to go after spouses because they feel like we go after them, you'll plead. And that's why the FBI has a 98% conviction rate.
Well,
because you plead out.
The idea is right. When you have spouses, other family members, that's a common strategy. They do that so that they'll. And
there was a point in time to where my mom, to where my dad said, because you get scared, when the government's coming after you, and they're saying, oh, life in prison, all these things. And my dad, the thoughts of my mom going to prison, my dad was like, I didn't do this, but like I cannot have you sitting in prison. I just can't do it. And I will never forget my mom looking at him and saying, we know what we've done and we know what we haven't done. So we're going in this together and we're coming out of it together.
Wow.
So but this, just to be clear on the timing, just playing devil's advocate here. This prosecution stems from a time when President Trump was in office. So it was President Trump's DOJ, that Department of Injustice that you're talking about.
Yeah, but at the same time, let's look at just the state in general. And there's only so much a president can do. That's why on this appeal, Trump did a great job at stacking the courts. And so on the 11th Circuit Appeals Court, there are a lot of Trump appointed judges. So for that, I hope they look at these remarks of Trumps of the South and kind of the government overreach, the Fourth Amendment violations. I hope they look at it and take it seriously. And at the same time, for me, it's tough. Now, I think President Trump, his case is in Fulton County, ours was in Fulton County, and now he knows firsthand kind of how dirty and corrupt they really are.
Why didn't your parent look? We know why people don't testify. We know all about that. But just for our listeners, well, if they didn't do it, if they're so innocent, why didn't they testify?
Because of how the government can easily take and twist and turn. And even though you may not have done it, unless there is, Alex, our attorney said it best. He was like, when I have clients, if you've killed someone, unless there's a video of a gun in your hand and you shooting it, you do not testify. He's like, because the government can take and turn and twist things however they want to twist it.
Mm-hmm. True.
And Jim, do you want to circle back to your question from a few minutes ago?
Well, I forgot what that was, Matt. I will tell you, Matt, though, I did read in some of the papers that that Savannah's parents were getting $20,000 an episode of their podcast. And Matt, I got to ask you, we're missing a lot of money here, bud.
We're counting on Savannah to spread the word. Maybe we're going to get those numbers up. All right.
I love how Jim's focus went to it. Listen, Jim, Savannah.
I understand you're buying a new house, Matt. Are you buying a new house?
Every time there's a guest on, there's always some some added perk to Jim. Like, like if it's like, I don't know, a forensic expert or whatever, he gets a little bit of tidbit of information he can use in his next trial. In your case, he wants to know how the podcast can make more money.
Hey, it's great. I love it. I make great money, so I will take it.
Good for you. Good for you. The, your parents' case had a lot of stink on it just by the fact that they went through bankruptcy and discharged $20 million of debt, right? I mean, and so, you parade that in front of a jury, and, jurors don't like that. But I want to read from the government sentencing memorandum, and it's sort of how they portrayed your parents, and I want to get your reaction. And this is the government submitting to the court. It said, Todd and Julie Chrisley are career swindlers who have made a living by jumping from one fraud scheme to another, lying to banks, stiffing vendors, and evading taxes at every corner. The empire was built upon the backs of defrauded community banks that collapsed, while Todd Chrisley used the stolen money to fly to Los Angeles for bi-weekly haircuts. And as their fraud imploded, the Chrisleys managed to shirk responsibility by abusing the bankruptcy system and writing off $20 million. Undeterred, they started a reality TV show where they flaunted their wealth and lifestyle to the American public. As they began making money from the show, they hid it and refused to pay federal income taxes that their viewers pay every year. Even while making millions of dollars, they insisted on defrauding everyone that encountered in the smallest ways imaginable. The BP oil spill fund out of money intended to help afflicted homeowners, a California homeowner out of rent money, even the network that airs the show for extra airline ticket. And believing themselves to be untouchable, Todd and Julie tried to obstruct the grand jury investigating their crimes and put their family members and friends to lie for them at trial. That's pretty hard stuff. What do you say?
It is. First off, when it comes to evading the taxes, now on appeal, we have Betty Carter, who was the IRS agent at trial. Our current CPAs went to her and said, hey, if my clients are owing money, then I need to know exactly what they owe because I need to get it taken care of. And her exact words were, what I said on the stand actually wasn't true. They don't owe anything. Because per his calculations, they were owed returns. And as you know, on these tax cases, you can see every time they log into the system, you can see how many times they've viewed our tax returns, what keys they clicked, what pages they went to. She accessed them over 12,000 times.
Oh, wow.
So you've accessed them over 12,000 times. How do you not know the exact dollar amount down to cents of what's owed? And we are now privy to internal communications that shows that she knew at the time of trial when she testified that there was no money owed, and the prosecutors knew that as well, which is why we have alleged, Brady violations, their misconduct. And so when it comes to the tax thing, that's bogus. When it comes to hiding money, that everything went through a corporation. The corporation filed taxes, and that the whole thing, that's just wild to me. And what the government fails to mention is my dad's former business partner, who my dad went to the police. The guy's name is Mark Braddock. My dad went to the police because this guy had stolen millions of dollars from the company. So my dad's the one who started with law enforcement. And the government ended up giving him full immunity, not just a little deal, full immunity. And this guy got on the stand and said, I committed these crimes. I forged their names to documents. I gave these banks these loan documents. I was in their emails. I was doing all these things. And so that's what the government forgets. And also, one of my favorite moments that I will never forget is when Alex, at sentencing, the FBI agent was on the stand, so they're going through all their documents, and Alex said, because this is when Alex came on board, and he said, I just have a question. What steps did you take to authenticate this evidence, that it is what you say that it is? And the FBI agent goes, what are you talking about? He said, what steps did you take? He was like, you have Quantico at your fingertips. What steps did you take to verify that these emails are exactly what you say they are? They came from where you say they came from. They didn't do one thing to authenticate the evidence. And all of their evidence came from my dad's former business partner, who they gave full immunity. Hundreds of thousands of documents.
That's actually surprising, because usually they make you plead to something to be able to preserve your credibility so that someone like Alex doesn't eviscerate, the guy when he testifies. So I'm kind of, giving him a non-prosecution, if he in fact had exposure, is not common. But
and when it comes to swindling banks out of money and the whole bankruptcy, they went through almost a 2-year bankruptcy court. There was never one allegation made of bankruptcy fraud, anything of that nature. And then the government's own witnesses from the banks, one of the presidents of the bank got on the stand and he said, during 2008, when the world was on fire, he said everyone was throwing their loans back at us. They were basically saying good luck. And his exact words were, during that time, Mr. Chrisley came to us and said, hey, what can I do to make you as whole as possible? Let's figure this out. Let's work together. Let's do it. Because he's in the real estate world. So obviously there's investments, all these things. He said, let's do a short sale on this property, that property. Let's try to get you as much money as possible. That's not someone who's trying to defraud banks.
Right. And one thing that I did notice, there was no referral out of bankruptcy court by the U.S. trustee to prosecute your mom or dad. There's no bankruptcy fraud that was charged, which,
And to
you see that a lot.
Yeah.
Not in your mom's case, for sure.
No, and they started investigating this in 2012.
Mm-hmm.
So if your case is that strong, it took you 7 years to issue a formal indictment. 7 years. And that's where my thing is. I've said from the very beginning, I'm not just a daughter who loves her parents. At the end of the day, if they did what you say they did, and you can prove it without a shadow of a doubt, they need to serve their time and learn their lesson and move on. But I know wholeheartedly, if you've got such a clean case, there shouldn't be Fourth Amendment violations. There shouldn't be government misconduct. There shouldn't be prosecutors who have lied. And now the main prosecutor is no longer at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and we don't get an answer as to why he's not there. He didn't show up at sentencing for the biggest case of his career.
He might have
get an answer.
At a big firm. They usually.
Oh no, he didn't. He's apparently at the FDIC right now, which doesn't make much sense.
Okay, so listen.
Well, I will say just the fact that your parents got 7 years and 12 years when the guidelines were so damn high. I know that's a lot of time, but that indicates to me that the judge had some serious questions about the case. And so, because I don't think you can get to 12 years for your dad without departing on a variance or something. I don't know what the guidelines actually were through objections, but
Mm-hmm. Well, it's the whole thing. When it comes to our judge at trial, I will hold on because I have the actual statistics right here. It's obviously on appeal, as you know, it has to do within the records. Something within the records is wrong. Mm-hmm. Our judge, out of 56 appeals, she's been reversed 11 times. She was reversed 6 times in 2020 alone and remanded back to her 17 times. And that right there, the biggest thing was when we alleged the prosecutor's misconduct, we asked for there to be an evidentiary hearing. Anything we asked for, she denied. She wanted to get the trial over with. She sent a juror home as she read them their rights to go into the deliberation room. She read them their rights. They went in, they were going to the deliberation room, and she left one juror behind and sent a juror home. So there was just a lot of things that happened and a lot of motions that she did not grant that we just wanted to prove our case. We wanted to have the opportunity to show the evidence that we had, and she would not allow it. And she also wouldn't allow us to talk about the state case either, which is where things got messy, because if it wasn't for the state case, the federal case would not have existed.
So a couple of things. First of all, you come with stats and receipts, which I appreciate. But
definitely one of the first guests to bring statistics with them. So good job.
Receipts. Well, wait till you hear some other stuff she's got. But But, Jim was reading all that horrible stuff. It really paints your parents in like the worst light ever. But at sentencing, we also make arguments for our clients about mitigating factors. So even though they're these horrible, corrupt people, look at what the life that they've lived, not just the fact that they don't have a record, but also maybe they had a drinking problem. Maybe they had, and the fact that they're really good parents to, I don't know, 6 kids. So, but I don't think nothing really popped out at me in terms of mitigation. Was there any, look, you can't make stuff up, obviously, but.
Yeah. Well, no, when we were there, there are 2 minor children, 16 and 10 at the time. And Chloe, she is my oldest brother's biological daughter. My parents have had her since she was a baby, and she's been legally adopted by them. And she struggles a lot with just mental health and things of that nature. And we asked at sentencing to speak about those things. But we also asked for the courtroom to be closed because it's a minor child. You're discussing mental health issues. Right. And the judge's exact words were, "This is a very public case and the public deserves to hear it. So no, I'm not doing that." So because of that, we did not discuss any of those issues. There were letters from therapists discussing very in-depth traumatic things. And Chloe suffers from separation anxiety, abandonment issues, all these different things. And now she was about to experience it times 2. So we asked for staggered, sentencing, all these things. And the judge looked back at my row of family and said, "You know what? Where's her biological mother?" And that was no place for this judge to bring that in. And we obviously were just taken back by it. And she said, "Well, you know what? There's a whole row of people back there that I bet would be happy to take care of these kids. I'm denying that."
Well, it's interesting because staggered sentencing, which comes up with couples, it also came up in the Varsity Blues case. Another case where people were saying it was celebrity, white privilege, all that stuff. And a lot of the couples were asking for staggered sentences. There's no law that says they need to get it, but it's usually up to the discretion of the judge. And if there's good reason for it, they do that. So I was a little surprised. And, just for people that don't know out there, one of the reasons I admire Savannah is that she is running a business. It's not just media and going out there and advocating for her parents, but she's also adopted her siblings. So Chloe, the girl that was adopted by her parents, is now, adopted by Savannah. And then your brother, you've also adopted. He's 17, right?
Yes, he just turned 17.
Yeah. So, and you have a boyfriend, which if he's like my boyfriend, that's your 3rd child.
Hey, he's got 3 kids. So there's a lot amongst us.
Right. So the other part to this is you keep mentioning the Georgia Department of Revenue. What did that have to do with the federal case?
So the Georgia Department of Revenue, there was an agent there by the name of Josh Waits, and he took a very unusual interest in the case. There is a judge who has said that in their rulings, that there was a very unusual interest that was taken in this case. And he was just hell-bent. He did a lot of the COAM cases in Georgia, and there was just a weird interest that he took on my family and their case. And he started investigating it for tax fraud, and he went around to family members, a bunch that he knew there were strained ties with. He was giving them taxpayer information, which is against the law. He cannot do. And he started building a case. And then he decided one day he's going to seize a warehouse that had my parents' belongings in it. And he went in with a search warrant that was never signed off on by a judge, waved it up in the air and told the owner of the warehouse he was going to arrest her if she did not give him access. And therefore, she gave him access. And that's where apparently 90% of their evidence came from. The magistrate judge, we had filed a motion to suppress everything that came from there. The magistrate judge ruled that none of the fruits derived from the warehouse or elsewhere was allowed in at trial. It's all thrown out. But then we get to trial, and the trial judge allowed all that so-called evidence to come in. And so that's where it gets messy, because the state was working with the feds. And there was also 2 women at the Georgia Department of Revenue. There was an unrelated case. They had been wearing wires for about a year. And they reached out to our lawyers and said, we think you want to see this information. Like, we feel so bad about what's going to occur here. You have to hear this. We have hundreds of hours of audio of them talking about wiping government devices clean of anything that has to do with the Chrisley case, about how they know what they're about to do is breaking the law, but they're going to do it anyway. You have you have very high ups. Because of us, it wiped the whole Georgia Department of Revenue clean. Special investigations, everyone. There was about 40 people that got fired because of us, because of the things that we uncovered. And they had a dartboard with my dad's face on it. And before he was ever indicted, and they used a dartboard with his face on it. And then come to find out, there are photos of Josh Waits. He took photos of my dad sitting in a chair from the show, and he would go and mimic that photo on that furniture that he seized, or laying on a bed, mimic that. It was a very weird obsession with our family in general.
You just settled a lawsuit against them, right? So
yes.
For $1 million. So what was the claim in the lawsuit?
The claim in the lawsuit was the government misconduct and, giving taxpayer information. He was working with WSB TV, and he would notify them, not only on our case, but other cases. He would notify them when he was about to make a bust, whether it was for these COAM machines or a big tax case when he's seizing stuff. He wanted to be the big guy on camera, going in, showing a badge, seizing everyone's items. And he would notify the press of this before he would do that. And that was one of the things we alleged. We alleged just the throwing the dartboard, just the Fourth Amendment violations. All of those things we alleged.
So let's close today's conversation with what the appeal, because you're arguing in March. What is the appeal about? What are the headlines on appeal? There's the Fourth Amendment. What else? Prosecutorial misconduct?
Yes. Fourth Amendment, the misconduct. You got the IRS agent lying on the stand. You also just have insufficient evidence. I mean, especially that's more so on my mom, just because how does someone go to prison on 7 counts of bank fraud when their name wasn't on a single bank loan? But the government, they said she benefited from the loans. That was their argument.
Right.
Jim, shouldn't these issues have been brought up in pretrial motions?
I mean, sure. I suspect they were. $6 million in attorney's fees. There's good lawyers involved, best I could tell. I know you got a good law firm doing the appeal now, for sure. And so I can't say what happened or didn't happen, but right. I'm curious about that $1 million settlement. Did the federal government swoop in and take it and apply it to forfeiture?
Restitution, yeah.
So it's funny. They were notified of this settlement back in October, and we have not spoken about the settlement because due to we weren't allowed to. But then the moment it hit the press, there was nothing we could do about it. So therefore, it was public knowledge. The government was notified of it back in October. They chose to do nothing about it. I never touched any of the money. Obviously, there's hefty legal fees that had built up from the Georgia case, from the federal case, appeal. So all of that went to lawyers. And now the government, they're going to try to claw it back, which I had Art Leach, who was our forfeiture attorney, and he helped create forfeiture laws for the government. And he's like, I've never seen this happen. He's like, in all my time. The government even tried to take my commission for selling my parents' house. I'm a licensed real estate agent. It's a 3% commission. I have sold $16 million worth of real estate last year. So this is not a for sale by owner. The government tried to take my 3% commission.
Oh, good grief.
So the government, they're trying to take anything they can get their hands on. So at this point, if they want that $1 million, they're going to have to fight lawyers to get it.
Right.
Wow.
Right.
I mean, I did see the garnishment, the latest filing, which had to do with garnishing on that restitution order. Anyway, we're going to rest, right, Jim? And we will be back next week with more continued conversation with Savannah Chrisley.
Yes. And before we do, I want to just give a quick plug to Savannah's podcast, Unlocked, right? You can subscribe, I'm assuming, on all podcast platforms.
Yes, sir.
All right. And same thing with The Presumption. We're also on all the podcast platforms, on YouTube at The Presumption. And yes, we will be back next week to continue this conversation. So Sara and Jim, why don't you guys go ahead and rest, and we'll be back.
Yep. We rest.
Rest.